is common knowledge that the center of the liturgical cycle of the Orthodox Church is Holy Week and Pascha. This is due to the central theological teachings that are fleshed out during this time of the year that truly manifest the essence of the gospel and are the source for the development of the rest of the liturgical year. Holy Week, therefore, is not mere liturgical ritual and rubrics, and also is not merely a reenactment of the events leading to the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ. Rather, the liturgical ordo of Holy Week is to be understood as applied theology, a living out of what we believe, as any liturgical practice worth its salt should be. This profound week of the liturgical year is truly the kernel that sets the tone for the rest of the year and, more importantly, gives meaning to our lives as Christians. In the short amount of time allotted, I will attempt to outline certain historical, liturgical, and theological aspects of Holy Week in the Byzantine Rite. Historically, from the geographical area of Palestine, the church spread throughout the Roman Empire because something out of this world happened that changed the world forever. Because of this, against all odds, an originally persecuted church expanded and spread throughout the world. This extraordinary event was the death and resurrection of the God-man, Christ, the Son of God, and second person of the Holy Trinity. This event is the starting point for the theology that fostered the liturgical traditions that came together to become Holy Week, which strives to somehow express this profound cosmological reality that changes everything forever. We will call this reality the Paschal Mystery. It seems that the early church had two ways of celebrating this reality. First of all, through the original Sunday celebration of the eighth day, or New Creation, later connected more specifically to the resurrection, and this celebration occurred throughout the year on every Sunday. And secondly, through a once-a-year Paschal celebration specifically connected to the events of the Passion, death, and resurrection, celebrated in a one-night vigil preceded by a day of fasting. When these two traditions came together, Holy Week began to develop. According to recent scholarship, it seems that this second form, the celebration of Pascha, originated in Asia Minor among followers of the Johannine school, and this was not connected to a Sunday celebration. Rather, it was celebrated on the eve of 14 to 15 Nisan of the Jewish calendar on whatever day of the week it happens to fall on every year. Because Christ was crucified on 14 Nisan and lay in the grave on 15 Nisan. These are the so-called quartodecimans, or 14ers, who are known to have celebrated Pascha in this way in the 2nd century, but probably were doing this much earlier too. The immigration of Asia Minor populations to other regions led to the spreading of their celebration of Pascha. Since, as we said before, churches in other regions practiced only the Sunday celebration of the resurrection throughout the year, the introduction of the 14ers Paschal celebration led to a cross-fertilization where the celebration of Pascha was celebrated on the Sunday after 14 Nisan. This became the kernel of Holy Week because the original one-day fast of the 14ers, culminating in a one-night vigil, was necessarily moved to Saturday. And because Friday is also a fast day, the one-day fast of the 14ers expanded to become a two-day fast ending on Easter Sunday. Because liturgically, Saturday is never a strict fast day, except for Holy Saturday, this exception points to this interpolation of a different tradition originally not connected with Saturday. This quartodeciman Paschal celebration preceded by a strict fast. This now two-day fast was fertile ground for a liturgical fleshing out of the events of these days, and soon this liturgical expansion covered the rest of the week. And by the 4th century, we have a true Holy Week. Another indication that the celebration of Pascha originated from the so-called 14ers of this Johannine tradition is the fact that in Holy Week, the central events of the Paschal mystery, that is to say, the Passion, death, burial, and resurrection, follow the timeline of the Gospel according to John. Whereas the Synoptic Gospels and the Gospel of John all agree that the Last Supper was on Thursday night and that Christ was crucified on Friday and was in the tomb on Saturday and resurrected on Sunday, the Synoptics and John do not agree regarding when the Passover was that year. The Synoptics present the Last Supper as a Passover meal and therefore Friday as the Passover, whereas John has Saturday as the Passover, and therefore Christ was crucified on the day before Passover along with the Paschal lambs slaughtered on that Friday for the Passover meal that evening, which means Christ is the true Paschal lamb who fulfills the type of Passover. This profound Johannine theology was adopted by the Church as the basis for the celebration of Holy Week. Therefore, the events of the Passion, death, burial, and resurrection celebrated in the second half of Holy Week follow this timeline of John, while the events of the first 3 days of Holy Week, the evening bridegroom services that are actually the matins of Holy Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, make use of parables and sayings of Christ and events precipitating the Passion as presented mainly in the Synoptics, although not exclusively. The lections used in the morning pre-sanctified liturgies of those first 3 days are also primarily, but not exclusively, taken from the Synoptics and have an intense eschatological ethos. Because of time limitation and the fact that others in this series of lectures have commented on the main themes of each day, I will not go over this in detail. I will only say that the general theme of the first 3 days in this eschatological sense of vigilance is this eschatological sense of vigilance because the bridegroom, Christ, is coming at a time we do not know, as emphasized so beautifully by the Troparion, or main hymn dedicated to the bridegroom services. Behold, the bridegroom is coming in the middle of the night. Continuing to look at Holy Thursday, the following can be said. Due to all the events celebrated on this day, at some point, this part of Holy Week liturgically became extremely busy. Since Holy Week in the Byzantine Rite is a tale of 2 cities, as the liturgist Robert Taft has said, that is to say, a synthesis of the liturgical traditions of Jerusalem and the nearby St. Savas Monastery with the liturgical practices of the Cathedral Rite of Constantinople. While the working out of this synthesis was still in process, Holy Thursday once celebrated a total of 6 different services: Orthros, Prithekti, Vespers, Niptir, that is to say, the washing of feet service, the Divine Liturgy of St. Basil, and all these were followed by a vigil service called the Panichis, which, in anticipation of the events of the Passion to be celebrated on Holy Friday, incorporated a reading of 12 Gospels on this theme, taken straight from the Jerusalem Cathedral Lectionary. Whereas such long celebrations were appropriate for monasteries, in the parishes something had to give, and the Panichis Vigil and the Orthros of Holy Friday eventually synthesized into one service, including the readings of these 12 Gospels. And this new Matins service, celebrated the evening before its normal liturgical position, pushed back all the morning Orthros services of the rest of the week to the night before, giving Holy Week its peculiar structure of Orthros in the evening and Vespers in the morning. This, at least, is one of many theories that tries to explain why Holy Week has this unique liturgical structure. According to this structure, in today's practice, Holy Friday morning begins with the Great Hours services, followed by Holy Friday Great Vespers, the so-called unnailing or apokathilosis service. What is of interest here is that in the service, in the scripture readings before the taking down of Christ from the cross, Isaiah 53, the suffering servant prophecy of the Passion of Christ, is read. At the end of this reading, the sorrow suddenly transitions to joy as Isaiah 54 is read. Rejoice, O barren one who does not bear children. Break forth and make a joyful noise. The church, barren up to this point, through the Passion of Christ, can now finally give birth to living children who follow this path of martyrdom, which is revealed as the only path of life in abundance. This points to the transition from death to life made when we sacramentally anticipate a life of taking up our personal cross through baptism. The baptismal font, therefore, is a tomb after the model of Christ's tomb. And this baptismal tomb becomes the womb of our true birth as living children of our true mother, the Church. Holy Friday thus emphasizes the connection of baptism with the Paschal mystery. For this reason, the liturgical celebrations of Holy Week were originally not only a commemoration of the events culminating in the death and resurrection of Christ, but they culminated tangibly in the sacramental death and resurrection of the people who were to be baptized each year, as Pascha was seen as the par excellence day for the mass baptism of catechumens. The unnailing Great Vespers service of Holy Friday afternoon is followed in today's practice by the Lamentations service on Friday evening, which is actually the orthros of Holy Saturday. Holy Saturday celebrates this transition from death to life, and therefore the liturgical structure of this service is festal and bright vestments are worn. The hymns particular to this service, the Engomia, are often translated as lamentations, but should more properly be rendered by what the word encomium actually means in English, praises, since this service already celebrates the new life made possible in the tomb of Christ. The restoration or reforming or true creation of the human being takes place only in the tomb of Holy Saturday. And therefore, everything before in Scripture is only a type. Christ's rest in the tomb is the true Sabbath. It is not a repeating or imitating of the Sabbath rest described in Genesis. On the contrary, that Genesis rest is a type or sketch of the real thing taking place on Holy Saturday. The doxastikon, or theological hymn that brings together the main themes of the service, which is chanted at both the Orthros and the Vespers of Holy Saturday, exclaims that great Moses mystically prefigured this day. This day, Holy Saturday, is the Holy Sabbath, when the only begotten Son of God rested from all his works, keeping the Sabbath in the flesh. Similarly, when we are finally in our tombs, if we have lived a life of taking up our cross and laying our life for others as Christ did, then this becomes our personal Holy Saturday, when we will finally allow God to act and truly create us, so we can be born as true human beings in the resurrection. Real creation is at the end. As Isaiah 46:10 says, God is declaring beforehand the latter events before they come to pass. This theme is emphasized even more in the Vesperal liturgy celebrated on Saturday morning. As a Vesper service, this service was originally an evening service. In fact, this was the original Paschal vigil that would end a day of strict fasting. the only Saturday with a strict fast. This was the Paschal Vigil when the catechumens would be baptized, and this is why there were originally 15 Old Testament readings in this service that would serve to allow for enough time for mass baptisms to take place in the baptistry, while the people in the main church, waiting for these new members to join them at the Eucharist to follow, would listen to these scripture readings that emphasize the theme of the day, that all that preceded was merely a type. What happens today is the joint celebration of the Paschal mystery and the baptism of the catechumens. This is the real beginning, the true creation. Through this mystery, death is conquered by death, as emphasized by the priest casting laurel leaves, a sign of victory, throughout the church as he chants from the Septuagint Psalm 81, "Arise, O God, judge the earth." As we celebrate Holy Week this year, may we also take up our cross and lay our lives for others according to the model and example of the only true human being, Christ, so we can be formed throughout our lives to gradually be born as true human beings, now in this life through sacramental anticipation, and finally, at the end, when Christ will bring all things to right. Have a blessed Pascha.